In the corridors of time are mysteries that defy explanation. Now, I'm traveling through history itself on a search for the truth. New evidence. Shocking answers. I'm Josh Gates, and these are my expedition files.
Every family has secrets. For most, it's innocent enough. Don't do the math on when cousin Emily gave birth after the wedding, you know what I mean? But some family secrets are much more disturbing. Tonight, we'll examine the files of 3 real-life family dramas and try to unlock the truth behind their twisted legacies. Let's start here, 1896, in the one place that nobody wants to be. A cemetery, the Holy Cross Cemetery to be exact, just outside of Philadelphia. And these 2 gravediggers are digging extra deep because the casket they're about to bury contains the body of Henry Howard Holmes, a businessman, a medical doctor, oh, and America's first serial killer. And there's a twist coming, a big one. Some say this murderer may have conned his way out of dying. For the first time ever, we'll reveal whether the man accused of killing over 200 people is able to escape his own grave.
H.H. Holmes is born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 to an affluent New Hampshire family. According to one account, his mother and alcoholic father are mentally and physically abusive. Once, his father is said to use kerosene on a rag to quiet a crying baby Herman. Meanwhile, at school, Herman gets good grades, but also gets bullied. He supposedly finds solace in the forest, where he begins torturing and dissecting small animals. With a dark fascination with anatomy, Mudgett goes on to attend the University of Michigan's Department of Medicine and Surgery, where his obsession with dead animals turns to dead humans. At school, he actually works with his professor to rob graves and use the cadavers for teaching. He even reportedly uses cadavers to defraud insurance companies. How? Mudgett buys a policy for a fictitious person, then disfigures the corpse so there's no way to identify it. Then he collects the insurance payout. After graduation, the now Dr. Mudgett realizes that perhaps he can swindle his way into larger fortunes.
In 1886, Mudgett moves to Chicago under the name Dr. Henry Howard Holmes. It's a new start, or at least a new place to run some lucrative cons.
And this is where some believe he combined conning with killing. He starts managing a local drugstore and reportedly tricks the widow who owns it into selling it to him. Not long afterwards, the widow disappears. With profits flowing from the drugstore,
he starts construction on a building across the street that he calls his castle.
Meanwhile, Holmes seduces a woman named Julia Connor, the wife of a man running the jewelry store next to his pharmacy.
This will make someone's wife very happy.
I want you to be happy.
When Julia's husband finds out, he quits his job and moves away, abandoning his wife and young daughter, Pearl. It's alleged that Holmes promises to marry his new mistress to gain control of her properties, but the wedding never happens. Christmas Eve of 1891 is the last time anyone sees Julia or Pearl alive. But it's during the height of Chicago's 1893 World's Fair that many say H.H. Holmes begins a serial killing spree. With hundreds of thousands of people visiting the fair daily, it becomes his human hunting ground. His sinister specialty is luring young women into the prospect of marriage, gaining control over their life savings, and then murdering them. Then, over the next few years, he begins forcing his employees to take out hefty life insurance policies, naming him the beneficiary. After, he collects a tidy sum of money when they turn up dead. One of his victims is 23-year-old secretary Emmeline Segrand, who Holmes allegedly locks away in the basement of his castle and leaves to die. Over the next few years, multiple women that Holmes is associated with disappear, and in 1894, with local suspicions rising, Holmes flees Chicago.
Now, Holmes was a swindler first and foremost. He was a very audacious swindler, but I'm not sure I would call him a truly successful swindler. He was sued at least 60 times in Chicago. That's about once a month during the time that he lived in Chicago. People figured out that he was swindling him and took him to court. For all the times he got sued, for all the times he got caught, he managed to get away from actually being in trouble over and over and over again. This is a guy who spent his whole life on the run. He seemed to enjoy being on the run.
But even on the run, he can't pass up a good con. In Philadelphia, he concocts a scheme with a carpenter named Benjamin Pitezel. Pitezel is to portray himself as an inventor and fake his own death in a lab explosion, and then split the $10,000 insurance money with Holmes. But apparently, sharing isn't good enough for Holmes, because he doesn't fake Pitezel's death. He kills him for real. What's worse, Holmes then allegedly kills 3 of Pitezel's children to keep them eternally silent.
But then, justice finally catches up to H.H. Holmes. On November 17, 1894, after weeks of tracking him, police arrest Holmes in Boston for insurance fraud, and he is subsequently charged with Pitezel's murder. The investigation leads authorities to Holmes's so-called castle in Chicago. There, they dredge up grisly evidence, including the bones of a child and tufts of a woman's hair. Investigators realize that Pitezel is just the tip of the blood-soaked iceberg.
The newspapers run wild with stories of Holmes's murder castle, claiming it contains secret passages, trap doors, gas and torture chambers, and a basement crematorium. Trying to capitalize on his fame, Holmes writes an autobiographical confession from jail, and in total claims 27 victims. Later, some historians will argue Holmes killed up to 200 people. Investigators are unable to confirm all the killings. But in the murder of Benjamin Pitezel, at least, they have Holmes dead to rights. In October 1895, H.H. is found guilty of the murder and sentenced to death by hanging. On May 7, 1896, a crowd gathers to watch as H.H. Holmes is put to death. The next day, the body is interred at Holy Cross Cemetery.
It's here that Holmes is laid to rest, or was he? Many believe he had one more scam up his sleeve, faking his own death.
Flash forward to January 20th, 1898, 2 years after Holmes is declared dead, when a Chicago newspaper reports that Robert Latimer, Holmes's former janitor, believes his old employer was never executed. Latimer claims Holmes escaped the country to South America, and that he's even received letters from Holmes.
If true, it would be the scam of the century. But how could Holmes have possibly pulled this off?
It's theorized that Holmes earns the trust of the prison chaplain by converting to Catholicism. He then buys off everyone else on the gallows. His accomplices acquire a body to pass off as his own corpse. And they install a trapdoor beneath the noose. When the moment comes, Holmes is presented to the audience, but after he's hooded, it's alleged that a row of guards hide his body from view as he slips through the trapdoor. And a hooded imposter corpse is raised onto the gallows and hanged in his stead. The very alive Holmes then hides out in a casket and is taken with the imposter's body to the cemetery, until night falls and Holmes slips away.
It's an incredible story, but did it really happen? More than a century later, the descendants of H.H. Holmes are still trying to solve the case.
Because remarkably, amidst all the deceit and murder, H.H. Holmes found time to have children. Holmes is married 4 times. At one point, he's married to 3 women at once. The results are 2 children, Robert Mudgett and Lucy Holmes, who both live until 1956 and have children of their own. Author Adam Seltzer has done extensive research and written a book about the Holmes family's search for the truth.
Jeff Mudgett is a great-great-grandson of H.H. Holmes. Holmes was buried in Holy Cross Cemetery outside of Philadelphia. So in 2017, Mudgett teamed up with some archaeologists from the University of Pennsylvania and got permission from a judge to exhume that grave and see if he was still there and see if they could get a DNA sample to see if it was really him. So a typical grave at Holy Cross in those days was 8 feet deep. Holmes was said to be a little bit deeper than that. They spent several days digging, and when they got down to 6 feet, they hadn't found anything. But then a little bit below that, they found an empty coffin. When you're digging up a dead body to see if he's still there and find an empty coffin, you have to consider, are all the stories true? Did he escape?
Did H.H. Holmes pull off one of the biggest swindles in American history by faking his death and then fleeing to South America? An empty pine wood coffin seems to suggest so. But to get a final answer, we have to dig even deeper.
After a few days of digging, they found an empty pine box, which was definitely a setback, as the last thing you want to find when you're trying to dig up a dead body is an empty coffin. After a few more days of testing, with time ticking away behind them, they dug a little bit further down and found another wooden board with the name H.H. Holmes written on it in wax pencil. This would have been the lid of the coffin that was described by the papers at the time. But down below that, they found cement. Holmes' last request is to be buried in a block of concrete. Presumably, the reason for all this cement was to prevent grave robbers. So they broke into the cement, and it turned out the skeleton was fairly intact. The jaw was way down below the skull, so it almost looked like he was screaming. The remains of the coffin lid said H.H. Holmes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's him. There was a medical examination of Holmes done back in 1896, but after that they did do a dental cast, and you can easily just visually match those dental casts with the skull. To go even further, they were able to extract some DNA samples that they sent over to England. And initially it was coming back as inconclusive, but eventually they decided there is a definite link with the Mudgett family. Everything about this guy was fake. His name was fake. The 3rd floor on his building was practically a papier-mâché facade, but people still invested in it. He swindled lots of different companies, he swindled lots of different women, he swindled lots of different people. Now, coming up with the idea to fake his death is the kind of thing he might have thought of, but there were at least 80 witnesses to that execution. Several of them were people who knew Holmes pretty well and hated his guts. He would have had to pay an awful lot of people off, and that would have been way more money than he ever could have gotten a hold of. So, through both visual inspection of the dental records and the skull, and mixing that with modern forensics and DNA testing, we can say beyond a reasonable doubt that person in the grave was Herman Mudgett, also known as H.H. Holmes. Holmes was able to trick a lot of people. He tricked all of his wives, he tricked most of his neighbors, he tricked an awful lot of detectives, he tricked an awful lot of credit managers. But in the end, he couldn't escape justice.
For a man who spent his life using a fake name and deceiving everyone around him, the evidence proves there's one thing Herman Mudgett couldn't fake: his own death. The power of forensic science and DNA testing has revealed that the body in the grave of Herman Mudgett is the man himself. And so, he didn't escape justice after all. He met his fate, as intended, on May 7, 1896.
You could say it's ghoulishly appropriate that Holmes, a man infamous for digging up graves and making bodies disappear, had his own grave dug up to ensure his body was actually there. After being exhumed, his remains were reburied in the same unmarked plot outside of Philadelphia. After all, a grave is supposed to be a place where families can come to mourn their dearly departed. In this case, though, I think we can all agree that no tears will be shed for H.H. Holmes.